sharing this time to grow Jewishly and just to have a good time. And you enrich our lives. Thank you. To be almost in the same room with you, Naomi, makes me happy. And that's one of the gifts of Zoom, is that all of us get to be in your home for this conversation. And before we begin, I just want to introduce you to one person, because Ari mentioned Bob Sklar, who celebrated his 80th birthday yesterday in the synagogue. He's the founding president of our synagogue, and he is a man who is able to do Hagbah still 6.5, 7 columns. And that's just the sign of his inner strength. So Bob, a happy birthday. I'm so honored that you're part of us. You indeed are a blessing. Rabbi Levy and I were JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, at the same time, which means we have known each other a long time. And again, it always makes me smile when I'm in your presence. You, as Ari introduced, came to California after rabbinical school for the opportunity to be the rabbi in Venice. And after 4 years, created your own congregation, Nashuva. How did you pick the name Nashuva, and what motivated you to create your own congregation?
First of all, happy birthday to Bob. And it's a joy to be here to join this conversation on the 713th issue, or whatever you call it, program of CSP. So it's a joy. And Ellie, it's always a joy to see you. I prefer in person, but I'll take second best. I started here in LA as a rabbi in Venice at Temple Mishkat Tefillah. And one of the assets of being at a synagogue that was 1 block from the beach was that I could see Mishkan Tefillah got a lot of foot traffic. Because we were a block from the beach on Main Street in Venice. And I would watch, and we had a very traditional conservative service. And I would watch how passersby might come in and sit in the back. And I could kind of count, like, how long is this person going to last? And then they leave after a minute. And I knew they were Jewish, and I knew that the service that I was leading was a service for insiders. It was a service for Jews who already are on the inside. And that was wonderful. I mean, our services were mostly in Hebrew, and it was mostly lay-led, and it was wonderful. I had a wonderful time there. And when I left Mishkan Tefillah, I left and wrote my first book, which was called To Begin Again. And when I wrote To Begin Again, one of the things that experience gave me was a chance to be all over the place on book tour. And often on book tour, especially in bookstores, I would meet so many Jews who would tell me, you know, I've quit on Judaism, but I'm glad that you're in this bookstore, because they probably wouldn't have come to see me in a synagogue setting. And it started to really, it just started to break my heart that I was meeting so many Jews for whom their connection to Judaism was something from the past. And then a colleague of mine reached out to me because he said that his brother was involved in something in LA, and he asked me to go check it out to see what it was. And I went to a place called Agape. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a very, very large church that I think at the time probably had 2 seatings of 2,000 people each. But what struck me at Agape was how many Jews were there. Just how many Jews were there. There were so many Jews that they were holding like all sorts of like Jewish chavurot, basically. And that the head of their operations was a woman named Audrey Levy. And something happened to me thinking about the people who would come to Mishkan, sit for a few seconds and leave. The people that I was meeting on book tour who told me that they had quit on Judaism in some way. And this experience at Agape and seeing so many Jews there. And I just felt that I felt called. I felt like there was a part of me that said, I didn't want to say to myself at some time later in life, why didn't you try? Why didn't you do something to reach the Jews who are on the outside? The ones who come for 30 seconds and leave, the ones who don't get it, the ones who say, you know what, when I am going to the yoga class, I feel God. When I'm at the Zen center, I feel God. When I go to shul, I feel nothing. And I don't understand it. So I just felt compelled, actually. It was like a compulsion to create an outreach, a spiritual Jewish outreach organization that was addressing unaffiliated Jews who had a strong spiritual interest. And I guess I'll say one more thing about that. I had a misconception that unaffiliated Jews were probably atheists. You know, that Jewish that faith didn't mean that much to them, and they were cultural Jews. You know, they might be involved in cultural Jewish organizations, or that they were gastronomic Jews. You know, they love to go to you know what I mean. And I was mistaken, because more and more what I was meeting once Nashuva entered the world were deeply spiritual Jews who just couldn't find their way inside of synagogue. And so, you know, we started Nashuva with like some new ideas and new rules for how we would organize and construct the organization and also the service, for it to be not a service for insiders, a service for outsiders.
So it's lovely that your book, To Begin Again, basically translates into Nashuva, and that one led to the other in ways of you seeing a need to bring in those who were outside and giving them access to Jewish spirituality. What about your background do you feel suited you for that mission, which, as a subtext, what brought you to the rabbinate?
Well, I guess there might be slightly different answers for those two separate questions. So yes. I'll answer the first one first. What about my background made me particularly suited to creating Nashuva? I probably would tell you that I wanted to be a rabbi, but I went to an Orthodox yeshiva high school. So, and I understood.
You wanted to be a rabbi starting when?
Well, that's the second question. I'll answer the second separately. But let's say I wanted to be rabbi, and there I was in an Orthodox yeshiva. So I understood what it felt like to want to be on the inside, but to be on the outside. And I understood what it meant to like be sitting on the wrong side of the machitza, like the wrong side of the curtain. And I understood what it felt like to just want to come near a Torah, just want to touch it and not be able to. So I think as a woman who had that experience, I think I have this deep connection to what it feels like to be an outsider.
Yeah, yeah.
And the second piece,
And that relates to saying, I wanted to be a rabbi and I went to a yeshiva. What was the seed for you wanting to be a rabbi? When did that emerge?
I wanted to be a rabbi, I'd say I was 4 years old. I was 5 years old. And as young, the youngest memories I have are of me wanting to be a rabbi. And people laughing, some people getting very angry if I said that, because it was like a sin. It was unheard of. And, I mean, when I was very young, I would go to shul with my dad, and I would just sit there and play with the strands of his talis. And I loved being in shul. I loved Yiddishkeit. And I wanted to be a rabbi from the youngest time. And although people would laugh, or some would just correct me that was not what a girl could be, my father and my mother, they didn't laugh. They believed in me and in my dream, but I also learned to hide it, because it was, as a girl grows, you learn what's appropriate and what's inappropriate to share. And I think certainly by high school, I didn't talk about it, because it just was like the wrong thing to say. It wouldn't be the right thing to say, to share. But it goes back that far. And you know what? I always say, like, what you dress up on Purim has something to do with some secret about yourself. And from the age of 4, I grew up in Borough Park. So on Purim, you are allowed to cross-dress, And my Hasidic neighbor from the youngest age would, maybe I was in first grade, whatever. So I don't know how old you are, 8 in first grade. But from that age forward, I always dressed as a Hasid. And my neighbor would let me wear that clothing just for Purim. I could borrow, the son's clothing. I've been dressing like the Hasidic rabbi on Purim from age 4 to this very day. Always the same, only one outfit.
Traditionalist, maintaining continuity.
Yes. I always say I have payas envy.
So your neshuva grew, and pre-COVID, you had, if correct me, the largest on-screen audience. You also kind of led the way for that kind of service. Talk a little bit about how that came about and how prayer, we're going to segue after that into prayer. How's prayer, how did it feel going online? And how did you feel, what were the challenges with connecting with prayer?
Well, let me say that, so the goal, like the word nashuva means we will return. And for those of you out there watching, I know Rabbi Spitz knows what it means, but that's what nashuva means. And so from the beginning, the mission was to bring Jews back home to Judaism. We will return. And so from the beginning, it was, there's going to be no membership. Everybody who comes to Neshuva is automatically a member of the community. There would be no dues. Everybody who comes to Neshuva, there's no tickets, there's no dues, there's nobody standing at the door on high holidays asking for your ticket. It's all donations of free will from the heart. So it was natural at the time. It has to be about 20 years ago or 18 years ago, I think, when I was approached actually by Jay Sanderson, who back then was doing JTN, Jewish Television Network, to go online with Kol Nidre. It seemed on one hand a natural move to bring Neshuva to the people. But I was concerned about it. I was concerned that people might stay home instead of coming to shul. And I didn't know how to feel about it. And I thought more about the people who were homebound, who couldn't come, and people who were in hospital, people who were sick, and reaching out to all of those people. And I remember my mom was in the hospital, and she was able to participate. So I knew it was a mitzvah. But afterward, when I saw just how many people participated, I just knew that what we did was a great service to the Jewish community, because there were so many people who would not go to synagogue, who for some reason decided to click online with us and to have that experience.
So you gave new meaning for me of click online in terms of connecting. In this case, people kind of clicked with what you were doing. Remind me how large your audience was pre-COVID.
Well, that first service was 100,000 people.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, unheard of. And
Yeah.
so what were your thoughts? What were your reactions? You really were the pioneer in that regard of taking a traditional like service online.
I worried that people might feel that it was over the top to do that. Is it too innovative to be out there doing that? But then once we were given the comments, I knew that what we did was a mitzvah, a major mitzvah. So it was really incredible.
And what was the reaction, response, and how did it fill you?
Everything from, I remember some of them just stick out. A group of students at Dartmouth who were all together enjoying this. I remember there was a man. Oh, there was a woman who said, if you could see right now, my father in hospice with his granddaughter on his lap, praying these prayers, you'll know what a service you've done. And just a ton of people just saying that they hadn't been to a Jewish service since their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah or in decades, and what it meant for them. Or people who lived very far away from a synagogue, or people who were just away on vacation who were joining us, things like that.
Well, my hand goes to my heart. Those things are clearly touching and a reminder of, in unanticipated ways, you indeed moving that vision forward of inviting people to be connected and click with you. So you became, through your first book, To Begin Again, an author, but other books would follow, including To Begin Again with Prayers. And you've become known as a prayer, blessing writer, and giver. Say a word about that journey into going from traditional prayer to creating your own.
Lord, I can tell you.
That's the way a prayer would begin.
it began like this, which is a long time ago, because I got pregnant with my son, and he's 30. So that's how long it was. And there I was, pregnant, and there was so much that I suddenly wanted to say to God. There were so many. I wanted to pray for the health of the fetus. I wanted to talk about my fears and my dreams, and it was as all your listeners can understand, I had a big problem because there was nothing for me to say. If you open up the Siddur, there were no prayers like that in the Siddur for a pregnant woman. And I found myself just spontaneously sitting down and writing prayers. And I would write prayers every day. And it didn't mean that I stopped praying or that I stopped davening the traditional prayers. It just meant I had this need, and it transformed my prayer life. And it transformed my relationship with God in many ways. And it helped me to better understand prayer. And I remember I was taking the natural childbirth class called the Bradley Method. And I started to bring the prayers to the class. And suddenly we became a community, not of people only learning the breathing methods, but a community of prayer. And I remember that I wrote a prayer for the moment of childbirth. And I was in no state of mind when I gave birth to recite the prayer. So I handed the prayer to my doctor. And I remember him looking at me like, what? You know, like, what does she want from me? And I looked at him and I just remember going, you can do this. And he read the prayer. And then I just saw, like, he just, his eyes were filled with tears. And after reciting the prayer, he sort of ran out of the room. And not exactly what I wanted my doctor to do just then, but he came back and he said, please forgive me, but I've been delivering babies for 20 years and I've never felt God in it. And I realized, like, how honored I was that a prayer I wrote for my family helped my doctor to feel God in a delivery room. And of course, how sad it is that you could be in a delivery room at this time of amazing creation and not feel God. But that was really the beginning. I never stopped from then. I stopped writing prayers.
You should only know how he inspired you to keep writing.
Yeah. Or just how that experience became just part of my, like, living and breathing. Yeah.
So when you use a phrase like to feel God in response to a prayer, what does it mean to you to feel God? And how does that connect with prayer?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First is, we rabbis talk about keva and kavanah, like traditional prayer, daily prayer, and sort of spontaneous prayer. And sort of like the metaphor that I think about when I think about prayer is, if you rent a new apartment or you buy a house, there's a structure there. There's a building, and you need that. You need the floor, and you need the roof, and you need the walls to keep you safe. And that structure, hopefully, it was there before you, and God willing, it will be there long after. But if you never decorate, if you never, like you were asking me about a picture, like if you never put a picture or a rug or a table, or if you never make it yours, it's just a building it's not a home. And I feel that way about prayer. I feel like prayer that we're handed goes hand in hand with personal, spontaneous prayer. And that way prayer becomes home. And that's what I've learned. That's what, and at the beginning, it's strange. Like when I first started to do this, and again, it was like 30 years ago, when I first started to teach rabbis about this, there was a lot of skepticism, and I was terrified. And I remember I was asked to give a session to the Rabbinical Assembly, and there was just a lot of skepticism, like, what does she think she's doing? And what is this thing, this prayer writing? What's that all about? And I remember one of my colleagues saying, if you do this, what happens if you help people with spontaneous prayer? What happens to rabbinic authority? What will happen? And I looked at him and I said, I promise you, if you give your people a way into prayer, it will only increase your rabbinic authority. And of course, now it's nothing. That's just like the videos. Now there's no question. Is it okay to have the videos on Shabbat? Every show's doing it. And is spontaneous prayer, creative prayer, some sort of blasphemy? Well, now it's just so commonplace. We don't even think about it. But at the time, it was a major change, or like a major issue for me to share those prayers. It didn't feel like so comfortable to share them.
So say a word, and then I'm going to read one prayer you wrote for you to tell us a little bit about it. But say a word about God and where God comes into your experience of prayer.
I see God as presence, as presence that fills the universe, and presence that's as close to us as our own breath. And I don't necessarily see God as a protective force field, or see prayer as a protective force field. And I had to learn that the hard way, because I used to. Certainly, I was taught to take prayer much more literally. And I believed that God was something more like Superman, who swoops down to protect the righteous and to punish the wicked. And I think it's only when a tragedy, I can speak for myself, when tragedy befell me, I was, where was God? But part of that had to do with who I thought God was. So I really think that for me, during my college years, I would say, when I had the hardest problems with God in the wake of my own personal tragedy, I had to come to see God, that I realized it was my perception of God that was causing me so much anger and so much pain. And the minute I could stop blaming God, then I could start listening to God.
And feel God's presence.
And experience God.
Yeah.
And I started to see God everywhere.
So let me read one prayer. I immediately, just before we began, opened up Siddur Lev Shalem, which has a number of your prayers. And when we get to the Torah service, like yesterday, I always smile when I see for the personal prayers before the open ark, a variety of your prayers. So let me just read one, and now we get to hear from you what stirs and what is evoked. A prayer for one's personal journey. Open my eyes, God. Help me to perceive what I have ignored, to uncover what I have forsaken, to find what I have been searching for. Remind me that I don't have to journey far to discover something new, for miracles surround me. Blessings and holiness abound, and you are near. It sounds a lot like what you just said a moment ago about your own prayer journey, but what are, as you hear your own words reflected back to you, what's evoked?
I'm honored that it's there. And it's something, prayer, it's something available to everyone and to all of us. And if I can shepherd people or midwife people through that process of experiencing you are near, that's for me, I'm honored to be able to do that.
So I'm going to ask one question, and then I'll segue to Ari harvesting some questions from your many listeners. And that is, what's your, as a teacher of prayer, what's your key guidance for us in these difficult times with the war in Gaza, with Israel, amidst battle, with uncertainties in the American scene? What's your guidance for us to write our own prayer?
I would say a few things. One is, it's okay to live with paradox. It's okay to have two thoughts at once. In other words, it's okay to pray to God for help and to, at the same time, have some doubts about what that help means in practical way.
Yeah.
I do believe that prayer works, but it may not work in the way, it's not that uncommon that people, especially people who are sick, ask, does prayer work? And I do believe prayer works, but it may work in the sense of giving us, I've rarely seen somebody pray for strength who hasn't received that strength. Mm. So regarding Israel right now, I believe in praying for peace because I believe in peace. And I believe that peace can only be made not from Oseh Shalom B'Momah, for the one who creates peace in the heavens, but that praying for peace can give human beings the power to make peace, because it's Oseh Shalom, the one who makes peace. You have to make it. So I believe deeply in praying for peace. Of course, I believe in praying for the return of the hostages. I also want to say that protest is also prayer. And the rabbis have taught us that. In the wake of the destruction, I just remember Rabbi Harold Schulweis teaching us this, that in the wake of the destruction, the rabbis, it's in the Talmud, they took the phrase Mi chamocha from Shirat Hayam, from the song at the sea, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods, O God. Speaking of God's grandeur and greatness, there's this phrase, Mi chamocha ba'ilmim Adonai, who is like you amongst the mute, O God. That is what I would call protest. prayer can take the form of question. Prayer can take the form of silence, because I think that for many of us, really, there was this sense of, I have no words right now. I'm not sure what words. So everything from the beautiful words, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, God, open my mouth so that a prayer could come out, to the phrase, which I love, Lecha Dumiyah Tehillah. For you, silence is praise. That just our silence is also prayer. But that we all have the capacity to find our words of prayer in this time. And if we give ourselves the space, we may surprise ourselves with the words that feel right for ourselves right now to pray.
Thank you. Thank you. Ari, your turn, with reserving some closing question or words at the end.
Thank you. Thank you for this program today. So here's some questions I see that have come in. The first is, when you write your prayers, do they just come to you very quickly, or do you work at them over time?
I'd say the ones that work the best for me come quickly. And you know, when I wrote Talking to God, that particular book, my daughter was very little, and she had a neurological disorder, and I was taking her pretty much every single day of the week for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all these therapies. And I would sit in the dark behind a two-way mirror, watching my daughter receive all these therapies. And I found it to be a very, very sacred time, a time where prayer came very easily to me. The harder it is for me to write a prayer, the more I know it's not the time to write it. Like, it's better for me when I feel myself more like I'm taking dictation and that I'm a channel for the prayer, as opposed to I'm trying to like push the prayer out. It doesn't tend to work for me that way. Ari, I think I lost you on the screen, but whatever.
I'm still here. Can you see me?
Okay. Does that make sense? So the harder the longer I work on a prayer, the more I feel like I need to put that down.
Okay.
And the easier a prayer comes, the more I know it's just the flow. I'm in the flow.
Rabbi Spitz, there was a request for what page that prayer was on in the Siddur. So
Page 169.
There you go. We haven't really spoken about your life experience at JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary. So you talk a little bit about what it was like to be in that first class of women at JTS in the late 80s.
Yeah. So you're talking to somebody who went to yeshiva, who wanted to be a rabbi. And, you know, I had to really keep my mouth shut when I was at Flatbush Yeshiva. Well, you know, I was a very good student, mind you, but there were questions I had to make sure, like there were limits to what I could ask. And there was this sense of, you know, this is the way it is, this is how it is, this is the way it is, and that you could only push to this far. And I mean, I had, you know, teachers that I won't mention names, but, you know, like things like, if somebody would ask, why, Rabbi, why? And he would say, you know, like, you know, like, this is what I said, and this is the truth, and this is the way. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of room for thinking out of the box, particularly when it came to Torah and whether Torah was dictated to Moshe from Sinai, or whether the Torah, which I understood already at a young age, had some really morally problematic things in it, what it was. So, and again, you're talking to somebody who wants to be rabbi from the time they're very little. And for me, going to the seminary, it was like coming home. It was like completing a circle. It was like I died and went to heaven. It was like a place where all those questions of my whole life weren't tolerated. They were welcome. So there's that. But if you want to talk about what it was like to be a woman entering the seminary, that wasn't always so easy. So as a woman, I was in the first class of women. And I was also I think there were just two of us who came straight out of college, because most of the women had been trying to get into the seminary for dozens of years. So they were older, much older. They had professions, they married, they had children, they had lives. And I was just 21. But in terms of the men there, some of the professors and some of the men were very welcoming. And sometimes I felt that I was like kind of walking into a fraternity where I wasn't welcome. I can remember a professor saying to me in a nice way, "What are you doing? You're such a nice Jewish girl. Do you really have to do this?" Just telling me I was, why do I have to do this? And he was my rabbi, and he was telling me that. And I can remember taking a pastoral counseling class, and the whole class was boys, men, except for me. And he was talking all about transference and about how people see you, the rabbi, as the father, as the God, and the transference between rabbi and father and God. And at a certain point, I raised my hand and I said, "Well, what about me?" And he looked at me and goes, "Honestly, I just don't have anything to say to you." And I dropped that class because I just felt so excluded. And just like I just felt like I didn't belong. But for the most part, I'd say I felt elated by the study and by the community and all of that.
And how many women were in that class with you?
12.
12. Many rabbis have their rabbi or rabbah who they go to, or who's their mentor. Who's that for you?
I have different rabbis for different things, or many rabbis. I wouldn't say I have one rabbi, but I have many rabbis. But I think at the beginning there, it was hard because I didn't have for myself, because I was the first conservative to head a female to head a congregation here. I didn't really have that. I didn't have that kind of mentor telling me, this is how to deal with that. This is how to, I was like learning on the job by myself how to deal with things. How do you deal with people calling you sweetie and honey? How do you deal with the silly things like, and again, my nature is not combative, I would say. And at the beginning, there was a lot of, silly things that people would say. They were trying to be endearing, but it was also demeaning, it was very common. Men would say, oh, back then, if my rabbi looked like that when I was a kid, I would have gone to synagogue more often, all those kind of like silly comments where they were trying to pay me a compliment, like that they thought I was pretty, which I didn't really need to hear. but it was also demeaning, things like that. And I am so happy that I can mentor women, young women today, about how to deal with things like that.
Did you interact with any of the female rabbis who were from the Reform movement who had gone before you?
A little bit, but I'd say actually not that much, no.
There's a question. Are you working on a new book right now?
I am.
Can you share what
But
it is,
I
or
also
is it a secret?
want to share the title of my most recent book that you didn't mention. It's called
Okay.
Einstein and the Rabbi.
Well, that's because we're going to have you on CSP to talk about
yeah,
the book.
okay.
But actually,
Yeah.
tell us, so tell us a little bit about Einstein the Rabbi, and then I don't know if you can share anything about your new book. It's up to you.
I don't need to share. If we're to do a whole thing about Einstein and the Rabbi, I won't say anything. I'll just say it's my most recent book.
But when did that come out, though?
It came out in 2017 or 2018, something like that.
So you haven't run out of materials. What's going on? You wrote a book. You're writing a new book right now. When will you? Yeah.
I'm working on a book right now, and I'm giving myself, slowly.
The Neshuva Minyan is a question about how you, first of all, how prominent a role does God play in the service? And how do you refer to God as a man, woman, or do you kind of mix it up?
The service is totally God-centered. And as I said, I feel that one of my missions is to draw spiritual Jews who find their spirituality in places like Agape and the Yoga Center and the Zen Center to get them back to Judaism. And I would say the prayers at Neshuva are very musical. It's there's a lot of ecstatic musicality at Neshuva. And all the prayers, we use the traditional Hebrew prayers, and I wrote my own translations to all the Hebrew prayers. And they might not always be word for word translations, but more prayers that I feel capture the mood of the Hebrew. I have one, I don't know why, but I just decided to, right before we started, I said, I'm just going to go grab that. So this is just one. This is Ma'ariv Aravim. This is the prayer, the nighttime prayer that we have every night, every Erev Shabbat. And so this is my version of that prayer. And it says, with the darkness comes your light. Earth and sky blend into one. The heavens seem closer now. The day's burdens farther somehow. Your presence is almost palpable. You own the darkness. You unlock doors I never thought would open. You decorate the earth with seasons. You paint the stars in the sky. You design day and night, showing us the light in the darkness and the darkness in the light. Bless you, God, for bringing on the night.
It's beautiful. I know we're running out of time. There's so many questions. I'll just try to get to a few before I turn it back over to Rabbi Spitz. Have your prayers been translated into Hebrew?
Some of them have. There was a book for chaplains in Israel that translated many of my bedside for people who are sick, for prayers before surgery, after surgery, prayers for when people are going through a difficult time. Those prayers were translated into Hebrew, but I can't recall what the name of that compendium is. So some of my prayers, you asked me about man or woman or whatever, and as I said, I view God as presence, so I tend to avoid he, she, and more stick with you, God, or the Creator, or Holy One.
I see questions about different prayers. Do you have prayers for cancer? Do you have prayers for this, that? I assume you do, and I will try to find Do you have your prayers like up on a website? Is it like available
No,
or is it only in the book?
thinking of a couple of years ago, my agent decided to pull the copyright so that we could release like an anniversary edition of Talking to God. So right now, the only way you can purchase Talking to God is a used copy. And in the near future, I'm going to be releasing like whatever anniversary. I don't even know what year it was published. Lord. Let's see. 2002. So some kind of anniversary edition of Talking to God that you can purchase again. Because right now you can't buy it.
But let's say someone is suffering from cancer. Do you have a prayer we could find on the internet right now that they could use?
Not on the internet, but in Talking to God, yeah.
Related question, people, I mean, I assume on your website is where they can find links if they want to join you or share your services so other people can watch them live.
You can join Nashuva's YouTube channel, and you can go to the public figure called Rabbi Naomi Levy. And so we live stream from both of those simultaneously. So the public figure called Rabbi Naomi Levy, not the private person called Rabbi Naomi Levy, but the public person called Rabbi Naomi Levy, and Nashuva's YouTube channel. I would say the public person called Rabbi Naomi Levy gets the most comments. So like there's more people actively commenting on the service there, but there's also a lot of people on YouTube.
I will say that particularly during COVID, I went around to many services online to see what was going on because I didn't really do that before. I'd go on the internet on Shabbat or Yom Tov, but I had to. And so I went to see you and I was very impressed. I was very impressed with the service, the musicality, and your speeches on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah were pretty legendary, I would say, because I shared them with many people. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I do want to make sure people know what a great opportunity. I'm sure those are out there too on YouTube.
The ones during the lockdown?
I watched a bunch, like I would say over the last few years, because I started to watch online. I would just search, and I'm pretty sure I saw you. I mean, you were outside on a field.
Yeah,
it was a big field. I don't know how many people were there, but it was an outdoor field.
We get, I think, and again, it's open to everyone. I don't know, like a lot of people. Well, more than 1,000. I don't know how many people it is, but.
So my last question to you is, oh gosh, I lose my track of thought here. I was wondering, when you read your prayers, you know, there's sometimes artists listen to a song and then they're like, oh no, I could do it better. I wish I could do it a different way. Do you go over, like, would you open your book and look at the prayers and think, oh no, I should have written, after X number of years, 20 years, I would write it completely differently? Or do your prayers hold up for you?
I was wondering about that, like if when I released the 20 whatever something anniversary edition, to sit with the prayers and see if I would change them. But for the moment, like when somebody, you know, I have a prayer when someone dies by suicide, and I just gave it to someone and it felt very right. I haven't really come upon a prayer where I feel like, oh, that's really dated. I haven't come to that yet.
Okay, so we'll look forward to this re-edition and see. I remembered my question. Outside of California, who is your biggest audience online? Is there a particular part of the world, the United States, that draws?
It's all over the place. Chicago, Detroit, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, Canada, a lot of different places in South America, Israel, people in Europe, and various countries in Europe. I don't know if I have like a specific following somewhere, but it's always wild, like when, just, and my niece is a doctor at Stanford, and she was telling a colleague of hers that she was coming to LA for the Chagim because her aunt is a rabbi. And she was saying, what do you do? He goes, oh, I have my community. It's, he's his doctor at Stanford. And he goes, yeah, I have my community. It's called Neshuva. It's great. That thing is crazy. Like bumping into people for whom, and I actually do want people to find their local rabbi. It's not that I want people to tune into Neshuva and not try their local community, but I'm not pushing them away either. I'm not saying you're not allowed to watch, but I do want them, and I do encourage them to. Sometimes I will say, like, because they'll say, I don't want to have to join and with the tickets, and then I'll say, well, just say that Rabbi Naomi Levy sent me, and I'm coming through the door, so that they don't have to feel that they're crashing.
I'm going to ask one last question, then Rabbi Spitz, it's yours. People ask, well, how come traditional Judaism doesn't have so many of the prayers that you have in your book? Why are they missing? Like, why did the world need a Rabbi Naomi Levy to come and give it to us? We have thousands of years of tradition, and these prayers aren't there.
Well, first of all, there is a tradition of techinas, of women's prayers that, and there are various compilations of techinas that I encourage you guys to look at. But I would say for the most part, and just remember this, okay? The prayers in our Siddur were also written by people. They weren't written by God. They were written by people. And there was a time in Jewish history where prayer was free-floating and free-flowing, and you wouldn't know what was going to be recited because there were paitanim, people who were poets. They were writing the prayers that you have in front of you, and it's only once things become edited and fixed, then you feel that it has like the status of like that it came from Sinai, but it didn't. And I just think that we have to continue that process, that there's always been a process. I mean, just remember when I teach prayer, I have to remind people, hey, you remember in the Torah, like Abraham just talks to God, and Isaac just exclaims to God, and Devorah writes a poem to God, and Miriam and the women, got on their timbrels, and like there's a tradition of spontaneous prayer. We just kind of seem to have lost the train. We need to like reignite that flame of personal prayer, spontaneous prayer.
I assume also that because the rabbis were men, they wrote prayers maybe that were for a different part of the community, or didn't think of certain things that needed to be addressed.
Well, the traditional prayers tend to almost always, but not always, but tend to be written in the plural, and they tend to be written for the people of Israel, not for situations. So they're less situational and less personal. So that's where I feel the niche to enter is to write personal prayers that are situational.
Great, thank you. We're a little in overtime, Rabbi Spitz. I promised you the last word, so please take
just
us on.
a couple of thoughts. One is 5 years ago, I was in Cape Town, and I went to the Garden Synagogue where one of our congregants, Ralph Stern, had been bar mitzvahed. And the rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, introduced himself, and I told him I was a conservative rabbi, never knowing how well that's going to go over with an Orthodox colleague. And he said to me, I just finished reading this book, Einstein and the Rabbi. Do you happen to know Rabbi Levy? And I said, I do. And it was a thrill to know that there in Cape Town, this Orthodox rabbi had been moved by what you wrote, and to have the privilege of connecting you by email at that point. I shared with you a quote, and with this, I will pull together what you have done with Neshuva. It's a quote I shared with you when we spoke last week by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, in which he said, theology is like reading a menu. Prayer is eating the meal. And indeed, you have opened up prayer to so many and continue to do so as in this conversation. And it's wonderful to share the meal with you this time and every time. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Elie. And what a joy it is to see you. And now I know we're making a date to see each other in person. And thank you for just this time together.
You're
And
welcome.
thank all of you who participated.
Thank you both. Thank you, Rabbi Spitz, Rabbi Levy. And again, I hope to have you back for Einstein the Rabbi. We'll find a date. Thank you, everybody who has joined us from around the country, the East Coast, West Coast. I guess have a great rest of your Sunday, wherever you are. Have a great week. Be safe. See you online. CSP next week. Bye, everybody.
Menachem. God be with you.
Bye.